you listening?
This is the Rob Scott Show.
Damn.
I mean, really, like, if we're not trying to change the world, what are we doing?
Yeah.
Welcome back to the Rob Scott Show. How are you?
I'm good, Rob. How are you?
I am amazing, and I'm thrilled to be here with you. What do you want to talk about today?
Yeah, so today, let's talk about attention. How does that feel? Do you think we can hold people's attention by talking about attention?
Well, we should get better at like hyping it up, but it is one of the foundational things that is maybe the most important thing in the world. So yeah, I think mastery of your own attention, people might like to think of that as like focus. People might like to think of that in a lot of different ways, but we're going to take it probably deeper than that and show how it can fix a lot of problems if we can understand our own attention in a different way. Is that a good way to talk about it?
Definitely. And like you said, it is foundational. So if you think about the things that you want and why you haven't gotten them yet, a lot of people talk about attention, focus, procrastination, clarity. Like attention really is kind of behind how good or bad you are at managing your attention, is really behind a lot of the doing and the outcomes that we're trying to get. So yeah, I've said this before, but let's get weird and kind of dig into how attention is also kind of foundational in understanding the fundamental shift and kind of experiencing this next level consciousness in how we talk about it in our training.
Yeah. So I love that. That's a really good introduction. So I guess what I would say in a really big sense is that your awareness, your attention, is a function of consciousness that is like at the root, the most important thing that's going on for you. Now, somebody else might argue, well, there's all these unconscious processes happening and they're really important too, like your heart beating and all that. And I will 100% agree with that, right? Like you're not alive if your heart doesn't keep beating and all those things. So what do I mean by important? What I mean in this case is that your conscious awareness, like what you're aware of, whether you're happy, whether you're sad, how you're behaving, what you're doing, that function of consciousness at the center of that is what your attention is doing. And most of your attention most people don't have a great mastery of even being that aware of where their attention is or how much it flitters around, and really all the different things that it kind of could be focusing on. And if you get any kind of self-awareness at all, like what I mean by self-awareness is awareness of your awareness, right?
Right.
If you can back up to sort of consider your own awareness, and if you watch it a little bit, it feels like it could be in about 1 billion places, right? You might be worried about the future. You might be worried about the past. You might be somewhere in your body noticing a sensation or an itch. You might notice hunger. You have longing, we have desires, right? Each of these, as we pay attention to them, our attention is flittering around. And then if we just think about like being online, how many tabs are open in your browser, right? Where you have this kind of history of your attention that more and more and more, because of all the options and all the speed of information, everything, it seems like it's getting more and more and more scattered, okay? So if we're completely blind to that, that's sort of like a first level of consciousness where we're unaware that we're unaware. And that's not a highly functional place. And it may be suffering, it may not be. It's not usually that effective a place unless it happens to be on autopilot kind of effective, but like it doesn't know, it's not self-editing in any way. This next level is where you begin to be conscious of your own attention, right? You start to go, what am I thinking about? And how is this going?
Right.
And there could be an immediate crisis there because of that complexity, right? We can all of a sudden feel really overwhelmed. Wow, what should I pay attention to? Gosh, I'm supposed to do all these things. In the morning, we focus on everything we'd like to happen in the day.
Right.
And then the real day happens and it's nowhere near. I mean, I certainly experienced this. I was just talking with Sarah about this. And
in the evening, you worry about all the
totally. In the evening, you're sad about what
and all the things you didn't do.
Didn't happen. You're scared. You feel behind. You're worried about the next day. This whole thing, and so that's then more of your attention. Now your attention is on that worry and on that another model of another day, whatever. And so to gain some agency of that, we have to even be aware that it's happening. So anyway, this is a long buildup to get to this kind of payoff of there's two places that your attention can be, or that's how I always say it. I think what's a more correct way is there's kind of two categories of where your attention can be.
Okay.
And if we can split those categories up, it becomes very, very useful in simplifying the management of our attention. Okay. And so in the free training that we do in and around it, many places, in a bunch of our products that we have, the gifts we give away, all that stuff, I have a visualization where I walk people through moving their attention around and putting it in these different places. But just so that we can know about it now without doing any kind of visualization, the two places are, you can either be in thought,
right,
or you can be in experience. Okay. And that might sound really boring. That might be like, well, so what, right? Like whatever's going on. But the ability to realize when you're thinking and leave it by coming back into sensation is this shortcut that is maybe the behavioral part of the fundamental shift, right? Where you become self-aware, you're aware of your own attention, you capture yourself lost in a thought. Again, I sometimes call that modeling or simulating. And in thought, we can, when we think our thoughts are really real, that's where we get a little bit more delusional. We get a little bit more worried about things that really haven't happened. And we're kind of ruining our now moment with this idea of what might happen. And we slam down into fear or anger or anxiety or whatever. So I call that like very far away from reality, because we're often our own simulation. Let me take it a little further. Like even within thought, there's a few areas. Okay. So often we are modeling about the future, or we're modeling about the past, or we're modeling about imagination. And what I mean by that is just truly an imagination that's not time bound. But all of those, whether you're thinking about the future, in fact, anytime you're thinking about the future, anytime you're thinking about the past, the part of that that's important is that you're thinking, right? And so we get lost in thought. We get lost in time. We end up having a sense of self that feels like it's not where it's supposed to be. It's not enough yet. It's not happy enough. It's not whatever. And so the shortcut out of that is to actually bring your attention back into your body, which quite literally is as simple as, what does your left foot feel like? What does your breath feel like? What does, what is it when your belly expands and contracts as you're breathing? All those things. And as we literally move our attention there, that is our agency to move around, quite literally, our experience of reality. And that's so foundational to be able to know that we're in thought and that maybe we're getting lost in thought, to be able to come back to home base, not to live there, right? Not to like just meditate on the stump for the rest of our life, but to then have a better relationship with modeling when we model, and also come back into the moment to really feel all the beautiful things that happen right in this moment, which is like joy and happiness and all the good sensations and all those things. So that's a big model said with lots of words, but was that, Sarah knows it well. Was that a clear way to describe that?
Yeah, I think so. And it gave me kind of new thoughts that I kind of want to share live right now, and either have you correct me in real time or just kind of take it further. But as you first were talking, I was thinking how similar we've talked about thinking and awareness, unawareness, and then and the word attention, right? Or focus, or whatever it is, And I was thinking, well, what's first and what's more foundational? And as you finished kind of explaining, there's only two places that our thoughts can be, like our attention can be. It's either in thinking or in experience. I was like, I was seeing how, let me put it this way. So we know, or most of us can agree that your thoughts and behaviors and emotions are connected, right? So if we think about what people want, what our clients want, what people in the world want, what we ourselves want, all the good stuff, right? That comes from having a better behavior, a better, better feeling, and which awfully is okay. Let's work on our thinking, what's going on in our mind, so we can feel better or do better, which this is not mine. This is, again, kind of chunks of the training. But with that kind of framework, if you look what's underneath that, because you said, awareness is really this foundational thing that's everything. And it really is, because the only way that we can we can monitor the thinking aspect, is having some control over where our focus is, and not just where it is, but being able to put it in different places and also either hold it or break it. Right. So
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about, all right, well, what if someone's really good at moving their attention into experience, right? So they're not like, I'm not lost in thought or whatever. I'm very like centered, and I can do long periods of meditation. But you put that same person then and say, all right, well, now let's put your attention into thinking, and like, can you switch into it? And then they're like, I am so overwhelmed, and
Yes.
like, I can't handle it. And I mean, I'm sure you and I both know people like this, where if you give them like 8 things to do, then they just are like deer in the headlights, right?
Yeah.
Some people can manage chaos and complexity better than others, but those people that can't, like, maybe are like, well, I can sit in meditation for longer. So it becomes not that one is better than the other, but the ability to manage when one is right and one is wrong, and how long, and all that is like is really foundational, even before the, oh, let's look at what's going on with your thoughts and your meaning making and all that, which we talk about, to then eventually impact feeling better, doing better,
Yeah,
So I don't know. That's just what I was
First
thinking.
off, just to the whoever's listening in podcast land, like, Sarah's blowing my mind. Like, in business, she's so much more productive than I am, and so freaking brilliant and fast at things and all these things. And then she's coming up with these kinds of descriptions that are like just phenometron and better said than I could. Like, that's really, really good. Not to take it further, correct. I mean, really, like, I think that was beautifully put. And I think that's a really important distinction. So first off, the 2 categories, which both have a lot to pay attention to, right? So if we go into experience, I could be at one point of experience, like, and it's not, in physics, 1 point's even smaller than this, but like, let's say just the rim of your nostrils, right? Like a meditation practice, it would say, can you bring your attention to what the sensation is and notice the difference over time of like breathing in and out? And you get these very different qualities of, it's kind of colder and drier going in, and it's warmer and, less dry going out. But then you can also kind of move that attention around in your experience. Like, Vipassana meditation is much more like moving in these very incremental focuses, but like through all these details of the head and down the neck and all over the body. And then there's like opening that attention to, like, can you feel both of your hands at the same time? Can you feel more of your body at the same time? And these are things that point toward people going like, oh, there's oneness, right? Like, there's this real kind of, oh, it's all one thing, and I'm cutting it into these parts, right? So the attention has like a focus size that can be really dialed in or really big. And then it's got its own kind of velocity of like, what's it looking at and everything.
Right.
The normal life is going in and out of both of these. It's just doing it very unconsciously, right? It doesn't really, it's not aware of where it is in thinking. And then it eats a strawberry and it notices a little bit of the sensation of that, but it immediately starts modeling about that again, or thinking about work, or, we're constantly, oh, that itch, well, that's experience again, but now I'm modeling. So it's not like we're ever not fully in time, but often we're not that embodied in the now, and we're modeling time and worried about the past, and guilt and shame and anxiety and all these different things are coming up. But to your point about thinking, feeling, doing, those are big aspects of being a human being, right? I would add a fourth, maybe relating, right? We could get into like, how does your thinking, feeling, and doing self, how good is that at relating? Like, how good are you? And each of these are like forms of complexity that we have to deal with. So we've got to figure out, like, how am I behaving? Well, there's whole sets of choices and goals and modeling involved in that. So thinking and feeling totally drive behavior, right? Absolutely.
Right.
Whatever I've done or is done to me affects how I feel in a huge, meaningful way. However I'm feeling and behaving is affecting what I'm thinking about, what I'm focused on, right? So that whole like interplay, most of us are doing all of that very unconsciously. And I don't mean like we're asleep or we've had, anesthesia, but I mean, we're not really at agency. And we've kind of made a self that feels very separate than all that. And all of those things are very overwhelming. We don't know how to manage it. We're not sure what the plan is, but like nothing's working out, because even when we're thinking about stuff, well, if I do that in my relationship, that's going to make them feel this way and me feel this way. So don't do that. So that's affecting behavior or stopping behavior, right? It's complex.
Sure.
So in that complexity, where does wisdom come from? And what I think a lot of people sell, whether it's in books or coaching or therapy or whatever, is like, here's the one path. Here's the 3 steps to running a good business. Here's the 5 tips on how to be in a relationship or whatever. But it's more complex than that, right? Like those are helpful when you don't have any idea what to do, but they're not final answers, because life is just, it's not 3 steps. Like there's a constant ongoing set of tensions and challenges and complexity that we have to figure out how to manage differently. The very beginning of that is your own attention. If you have no idea like where your attention is going or what, you have to get that, okay, well, there's 2 categories, both with a bunch of complexity and places that could be within them, but it's really good to know the difference. And once you're into experience with your attention, a bunch of things have simplified. You're no longer in time. You're here in this moment, okay? If you do it well through the fundamental shift, you're no longer in judgment of good and bad. You can drop judgment of good and bad. There's all these things, which that would be like non-dual, right? So that's a non-dual experience. It's very simple. There's no path to it. It's right here for you anytime. And people usually herald that as some like big spiritual accomplishment way down in the future, whatever, but it's actually much simpler than that. But then when we go into thought, we have, okay, there's a bunch of places, all of those pushes of behavior and emotion and thinking, the modeling, all these different things. Where the wisdom comes into your point is we could be very skilled at thinking. Very smart people might be absolutely horrible at being present, right? Like stopping that thinking. It's very organized and can hold a lot. And is, you know, we look at them and go, wow, look at all that they can think about and hold, how smart they are. But they're, to your point, not talented at presencing and stopping thought, right? Coming into experience instead. Other people who are very grounded, whatever, to your point, you put them out here. So now once we do the fundamental shift, we start with like, can you get out of the complexity of thinking so that you have some relationship with both these domains where you can go, okay, now I know I'm thinking, am I doing it well or not? Whether I'm doing it well or not, I can stop it. Now I'm in experience, am I doing that well or not? Now I can start thinking again, right? So that agency of getting that skill down. And then what we do in identity shifting more specifically is now the management of that into wisdom of how do I behave? How do I think? How do I manufacture different feelings and go from anxious to confident and all these things? That's the wisdom of what identity shifting really is, because this management of all of this is the management of your self, your sense of self, your identity and all that. That makes sense?
I mean, totally. And I think speaking of the fundamental shift, I think when we started restructuring and kind of pointing people, in this kind of free gift, free training to the fundamental shift first, we found that there are some foundational concepts that kind of need to be, that are part of the fundamental shift, but they're not the fundamental shift, right?
Mm-hmm.
The fundamental shift, there are things that are required to be understood in order to have the experience and have the skill. In our last podcast, I think, or the podcast before, you said something like how people think, oh, Rob, your stuff is just another belief, right? You're just, and you're saying, no, what we're doing is we're examining, the entire system of belief creation. We're putting that structure under the microscope. That's not the same as one belief in that sense of thinking of, I think, attached to thinking, right? So you're like meaning making thinking.
Yep.
If you think about attention, which is similar to thinking, as we can be unaware of it or unskilled at moving it around or, not being able to change where our attention is, it's maybe not so much a practice, right? Because people will hear you say, there's no path to it. There's no, practice harder and then I'll get there. It's always there. It's almost like, the fundamental shift is the application of all these concepts. It's not just, can you find presence? Yes, but it's not, can you make good meanings? Can you shift meanings? Can you notice your attention? Do you have awareness over your thinking? It is the application, like it's like all of those in chorus with each other. And so what we're calling the fundamental shift involves all of that, but really it's the ability to go from like, oh man, I don't want to mess it up. Now I said it's all not these things, but really it's like kind of this fundamentally different way of doing all of it, right? Because we just said it's all connected. Our awareness and how aware we are and how we can manage it impacts our thinking impacts our feeling and doing. It's all of it, right? And it's having a completely different relationship with it, not just the experience of one thing or the practice of one thing or the awareness of one thing. It's like meeting something in a brand new way where you're just like, hey, I've never seen anything like in this perspective before, or not perspective before, but you know what I mean? Like it's,
Yeah.
and that's why I think it's been a fun, oh, I was just going to say, that's why I think it's kind of been fun to piece together and do the work that we've been doing with you this year, because I'm getting to see like, oh, this is, you know, it's helping my understanding of it even like kind of hone, where it's like, oh, these are concepts that we need, but it's not that, and it's not that, and it's not that, you know what I mean? And kind of just being able to piecemeal it into chunks to kind of teach the concepts, but also then say it's now all of that, and you're kind of super human.
It's a super skill. It's a super skill. It really is a super skill. And it's so funny because I think a lot of Eastern traditions have this sense of, in one way, it's this incredibly profound thing. It's like deeply valuable and huge. But then you'll hear the quote unquote master talk about it and go, it's totally simple. It's everyday life. In fact, everyone's doing it all the time. They just don't even know they're doing it. Right. So how can it be both? Like that, and we call that a paradox. Then we just kind of go along the way. I guess I don't get paradoxes, whatever. But like once you see this, it really is that. And so one of the things is, if I say like, just taste what your mouth tastes like now. And I say, okay, you've left thought and gone into experience. That is a fundamental shift, right? You just used consciousness to move your consciousness around. But the self that you are hasn't had the realization of how profound that is, right? So you can have a in the moment experience of this one little thing that's like, what does he mean? I'm feeling my hand, now I'm thinking, like, who cares? But when you see that, like, that's not only available to you in any moment, that changes your whole system of attachment to thought, right? So that every time you're upset, there is a combination of emotion, situation, which we might call behavior over time, but in the moment there's some situation, there's an emotion about it, and there's thought, there's meaning making. When you can actually break up from the sensation of the feeling, the meaning of it, the meaning making that you're doing in the story, you start to go, oh, all of that is editable, right? So that is a skill. So like in a black belt system, like the white belt goes and like flips someone over and they go, cool, maybe that's exciting, maybe I like it, right? So if somebody's really anxious and I just get them to calm down through their breath, maybe they like it, but they don't have any kind of agency of like what they really just learned. And over time, maybe they don't have the skill to then go apply it. So what happens is there's like wake up, and that can be deeply profound where you really see the whole significance of it. That's one kind of wake up. But you can experience it before that. I would argue that you are all the time, you just don't know you are, right? So it's this combination of like experiencing it, being conscious that you experienced it, and kind of getting the significance of what it is, almost like as the rule, right? Like there's a core rule here that is constantly going on in your meaning making, which is driving your thinking, your feeling, and to your point, your doing, which is pretty much, I hate to tell you, everything you care about.
Right. I know we say it in 3 words, but it really is like literally it's like the love for your partner, it's your commitment to parenting, it's your work ethic, it's all the things that we want, and all the outcomes we want are then simplified into those 3 words.
What's funny is I'm really like trying to get slides for this so I can kind of show this, and I think it's really interesting that like what humans tend to do, it seems to me, is in the moment we're looking at whatever the complexity is, and we really want to get that solved because it's the loudest, most important thing. So that might be like make more money, get a new job, you know, be healthier, whatever those things are. And that's usually what we're investing time, energy, money in. Like that's the thing. But if you really back up and go, what do you really want, right? Because we all know that even after you get that thing, it's good for a little while, and then there's just more like desire after. So it's like, what do you really want? Well, you want self-mastery across all the dimensions. You want self-actualization across all the dimensions. You want self-transcendence so that you're not trapped in this desiring, unhappy, whatever self, right? And so there's this, like what we really should be looking for and doing is like, what are the underneath rules that are always pulling the strings on all these things? And that's why this is this universal first step out of the chaos into the beginning of wisdom, right? The real beginning of like, oh, wow. And if we become wise, that helps you get the thing you wanted in this moment, but it also helps you get everything after it and solve this and not pay attention to that thing that didn't matter that you were stuck in a loop with for the last 2 years or whatever. It helps you like break up with the bad relationships, foster the good ones, like the whole thing, because we're fostering wisdom at the core level of like your meaning making and attention itself, right? So when you hear, oh, he's telling me to breathe again, this is a meditation thing or whatever, it's like, no. Like it's way more than that. It's not that, but it's not that, right? It's close to that. Hopefully if you did that, you could get it too, but they're not pointing out the significance in the same way really anywhere else that I can find. I mean, I just don't see anyone doing it, right? So
yeah, I mean, it's like a holistic kind of perspective, and that's why I kind of wanted to start with attention. Rob's like, well, what should we talk about today? I'm like, let's start with attention, because it and this is maybe a stupid example, but I'm going to share it because it's in my head. I think about how so we have a program called the Back to Breath Challenge, which is to help you grow a mindfulness practice. And one of the things in there, a question that we always get is people are like, how do I know that I'm not thinking? And it's like, they're playing with these concepts of where is my attention? Is it in thought and is it experience? And they're thinking about thinking. And then they're also like trying to play with getting better at their attention. Thinking and attention are just two of the levels that we can be. And so the kind of, we'll call it the payoff of the fundamental shift, because yeah, sometimes I guess it's technical or it doesn't sound super interesting, but the payoff of this kind of meta skill is that all of a sudden you have all the dials to play with. And I was doing some editing for our podcast, and I was doing a little research on all the different ways that you can play with the sound of something. So obviously you can make it all louder. You can make it all quieter. You can smooth it. You can make the bass higher, the treble higher. You can make, put effects on it. It doesn't mean that you have to do all the settings. It just means that all of a sudden when you go to click, what are my options here? Like, what do I need to, like, I want something. How do I do it? Instead of having one, like, oh, turn it up or turn it down, you have like 30 settings that you can play with.
And you
it's
understand
not just
them,
and you understand them,
right? Like you
right? You're
become a
not
master
overwhelmed by
at the
all of them.
Yeah.
Right. And that's like really key. And so, it's not just attention, it's not just thought, but like attention is foundational to all of this. Thinking also matters to all of this, which I think is what makes it sound, we're like, oh, it's not that, we're always like, it's simple, because it is, because it's then, it's just the menu where it's a drop down and all of a sudden you have 30 options instead of one, which is simple. It just means that your options to get your outcomes have widened. It doesn't mean the complexity of, and actually your scenarios of like, how do I do this, have shrunk. Right. Use the skill, the fundamental shift. And then, your outcomes have widened instead of attaching to like, what are all the ways that I could get to this one thing? Because to your point, we all want more than one thing. I mean, if we're honest with ourselves, we all want more than one thing.
And if you don't now, you will in a minute, right? Like that's,
right.
That's, as soon as you're tired, you'll want to go to bed. The next morning, you'll want food. It's like that's that never ending, because that's just the complexity of life. That's what we're doing. We're fighting off entropy, and we're fighting off the complexity of life all the time. That's what being alive is. That's a great example. I do want to really land on though, the options that you get. Like for a narrative for people who don't love computing, the option settings can be really disturbing, right? It's like, I actually don't want the thing with all the options because I don't know how to run it. So the important thing here is that you actually see how it's all running. So like that makes perfect sense to you, and you can tweak this and tweak that, like with mastery, right? So it really is kind of, but right now your life looks like an option board that you have no idea how to run. It's like, what do I do? How do I change this? How do I turn that up, that down? And I would say you're not even looking at the right option board, right? Like you're tweaking things that actually have nothing to do with getting you what you really want, because honestly, in some ways you don't even consciously know what you really want. It's what I meant before with like, you think you want the tennis racket or whatever, but you actually want a whole different sense of capabilities. So this is the capability that simplifies life. And to Sarah's point, I love the analogy in this way, gives you these really obvious tools to go, oh, like that's what drives that. That's what drives that. Let me do that. I don't have to be so attached there. That's the thing. And so it's truly mastery that is super simple, but gives you this power across massive amounts of domains of your life. In fact, all of your life, right? This is the like missing ingredient to running your whole world better. So across the domains of success, being happiness, fulfillment, relating, the whole nine, right? Like that's the deal. There was another thing that you mentioned that really, it might come back, but it was.
Well, let me just jump in and say,
sure.
before, here's another analogy. I'll take another swing at the analogy game here.
Yeah. I loved your
Is I
analogy.
feel like,
Yeah.
oh, thank you.
Mhm.
I feel like before kind of having access to this concept, I feel like I'm standing really far from a target and I have an infinite amount of arrows that I can shoot to try to hit this target. But now I feel like I'm standing in front of a wall of targets and I really can't miss. And the only thing I have is a single arrow. And it becomes less about, what do I do and how do I get there and how do I hit this like one bullseye, is that I see 100 bullseyes now that are easily hit, but I only need one arrow, right? So that's what I was trying to say in the complexity. Like, it doesn't actually make it more complex. It actually makes your target all of a sudden ginormous. You don't need 100 arrows in your backpack to hit it. And
because
it's
any arrow is going to hit. You can't miss.
Any arrow is going to hit. Right.
It's even different than a wall. It's like now you're inside a globe that if you do nothing, the arrow will fall away and still hit. Like it
right.
is,
you can't miss. Yeah, you really can't miss. And so
miss.
that's why when you talk about wisdom and this kind of path, this is the start to having real profound wisdom, because then all you need is the wisdom, not the decision making and what do I use and how much do I have to stay at it and what's my habit and what's my willpower and who's going to help me and like, is this going to help my relationships? No, all you need to know is the wisdom of where do I put my attention right now?
Yes.
To like get me whatever I want. And it becomes like, maybe that's the best way I can analogize it for now, but like it really becomes way simpler with a much better shot of hitting what you want.
Totally. Totally. So I love that. Fantastic. I thought of what I wanted to say before because you brought it back to breath, and I think this is pretty much what you meant, but I want to really call it out. When people start any kind of a mindfulness practice, like let's say they're looking at back to breath, which by the way, back to breath is a 7-day thing. You pick the time. It could be 1 minute a day. And I think the audios in it are like 7 or 8 minutes each, right? It's like the commitment time. You're going to watch a longer YouTube video than the whole week's worth of content tonight, right? Like this podcast is probably longer than that whole thing.
Right.
But it's so pointed, and it's got what to do after. So it's incredibly useful. And it really helps people understand this thought versus experience thing. It gives you a handful of little practices, like one each day to just test. And if you want to do more, you can do, it's up to you. You do as much of it as you want. And it really explains this concept of back to breath, which is just a great anchor for this. But during that, one of the questions that we get all the time, to your point, is how do you stop thinking? Okay, like what do you mean stop thinking? Like what does that mean? And people really don't get the distinction between the two. And I think this is so foundational. And if you already know, sorry for the simplicity, but if you don't know, I think the majority of people have no idea. Like,
no, I mean, we get that question a lot. Like, I mean, that's probably the only question we get, because of course it's something like, what do you mean? Am I noticing my sensations? Am I thinking about them? Am I thinking now? Like, they have no
What's the difference between noticing my sensations and thinking about my
thinking,
sensations,
right?
Yeah. And so it is subtle, but it's, once you get it, it's deeply obvious. Okay. There's a difference. But one thing I want to point out is that from within thought, you can't stop thought. That is not where you stop thought, right? There is no thought, like there's no program of thought that runs like, hey, okay, the thought is to stop thought, and then thought stops. That's not it. It's actually the move of your attention, right? So when you take somebody who's, let's say, a little bit neurotic, and they're just working, and they're thinking about the stuff, and they're modeling other people and concerns and emotional stuff, and it's just going. And then you go, hey, stop thinking, which is what most of the meditation training would do. Like, hey, well, all we're doing is we're sitting down and we're stop thinking. And then when you see yourself thinking, stop thinking again, or whatever. There's no point. Like, what does that even mean? How from within thought could you stop thought? It makes no sense, because you're actually in a whole domain of modeling and thinking, and right. So from there's like no way out. So it's actually just stopping doing that by literally, because your attention is a place, moving it, not even to gain, where was I in thought? right? So that's another way to just think more, right? It's like, well, what am I thinking about? Do I have to remember this?
Right.
That's just more
Right.
thinking, right? That's it. So the drop, which is what we illustrate really well in the back to breath thing, is just move your attention to like, what do your lips feel like right now? Right? So then you're on your lips and you're going, okay. And so to that point of like, am I thinking about feeling or am I actually feeling? The distinction is, one way is like, do you hear a voice in your head talking about your lips, or do you actually feel like the energetic sensation of lips, right?
Right. Oh,
And
that's great.
that's
Yeah.
it. That's it. And so even once you're out of modeling the world and other things and you're into your own, am I thinking about my lips or feeling my lips? And by the way, when we're starting this, it's going to be flittering in and out. There's not going to be any consistency. And so what most slightly neurotic people do with that is they go, oh, I'm so bad at this. Here I am thinking again, look at how bad I am. Look at how bad I am. I'm supposed to be meditating. I can't even focus on my lips. And this narrative is what's going on. Each one of those critiques is not your path out of thinking. It's just another thought, right? It's just more thinking. So rather than doing that, because that's pointless, as soon as you notice with your conscious attention, oh, wow, I'm thinking again, which you might be 15 seconds down the road of some, boy, that person's cute, really like them, that's awesome, whatever. And then you go, oh my gosh, I'm thinking again.
Right.
Any
Right.
more self-shaming after that is absolutely pointless. Like there's just no function that just on the noticing, you go, what's my breath feel like again?
Right.
That's it.
Right.
That's what back to breath at its essence is doing. And then there's some other, useful tips in the program. But that is how you stop thought. That's what I wanted to call out is it's not
Yeah.
done in thought. There's no
Thought.
strategy. It's not like, how do I
Right.
do it? You're never going to know how to do it. It's actually just the action of doing it. It's just what's your left
Right.
hand
Right.
feel
Because
like,
the knowing of something is thinking of
is
it.
more
Yeah.
thinking. Yeah. If you
Yeah.
know how to do it, then you're modeling it and describing it and talking about it. And that's not it. Right. That's what
Right.
we say. Well, that's not it. Okay.
Well, and I kind of also want to give a nod to like, at least from my seat, I'm not saying like, oh, you get the fundamental shift and you're like a master at this. Like this is the skill of application, right? Like let's
Mm-hmm.
think about the fundamental shift as being skillful at applying this to your own life.
Mm-hmm.
And we live in a time where we have our people are vying for our attention. Screens are vying for our attention. Information's vying for our attention. The people, our texts, our pings, our iMessengers, Facebook message, like
Yeah.
everyone can find you in every sense of every. So this is something that like is something that I like remembering is foundational,
Mm-hmm.
because when I'm like, oh, there's where can I do better? How can I do better? Whatever. Like it comes back to like, well, how is my attention? What am I focusing on? How's my meaning making? Have I had a good relationship with the present moment today? Have I, where, like, it's kind of like my gauge of like, okay, like take a minute, see what you've been focusing on, where you've literally been putting your attention, and then adjust that instead
Mm-hmm.
of looking at the the end of it all and then feeling all overwhelmed and be like, oh, I don't know, I need to get this done and I need this and I don't like that. Like it really kind of centers me. And often, I was thinking about, this is an aside, I was thinking about you and me and how I feel like when we were talking about how attention's different than thought and thinking, where you can, be really good at sitting in presence, or you can be really good at doing and not being good at switching.
Mm-hmm.
I think for me, I think I often need to like really leave move my attention out of experience of thinking and into experience.
Yeah.
I'm also someone that can, like you were kind of complimenting me earlier, I can kind of crush it a lot of things at once.
Yes.
I'm good at the complexity and the chaos.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like sometimes for you, you're so like, you have a great connection with the presence and you have mindfulness and all this, that you're like, oh man, I really don't want to leave this to go
Mm-hmm.
into this like thinking. So it's just funny, it's just interesting to kind of notice it as kind of this thing that's foundational, and just to say that I think we can all improve on attention management, which is relating to thought, but not the same as our meaning making that we often
Yes.
talk about it. We're
Yeah.
really talking about something that comes before that and runs underneath that. And
Can I make one comment?
Yeah,
about
please,
what you
please.
said? So first off, I love that. I think that's really funny how you kind of notice like, oh, Rob's really grounded and he's like bothered by, like don't pull him out of that. So, but before that, you were talking about becoming aware toward the end of the day of like, how am I doing on this, all this? I want to point out that that is more thought, but it's wise thought, right? It's wise thought that gets that this is going on. And so that's an immediate application of even just understanding it. Like, you don't have to have a long meditation practice. Like, it's actually not about that. Now, it's really helpful to have the skill to really get out of it. And I'll tell you when that will make a ton of sense to you. If you go through a real tragedy, something that is just deeply devastating to you, you will find that like just focusing on your breath is one of the, I mean, you might try to dull yourself with drugs, or, you know, there's other ways to sort of change your attention and experience. But if you just had nothing else to do, any kind of modeling is so horrific because this bad thing has happened or whatever. Coming into breath is like the only place where there's a sanctuary, right? And so we're much more open to meditating, to working with consciousness, doing these things in the face of, you know, and that could be as bad as like somebody you love has passed away, or you've been betrayed, or there's some, you know, you're in danger in some way, or it could be just the noise of a political thing that's got you super duper crazy. It could be the pressure of going to Thanksgiving with other political sides in your family and like that pressure. So, you know, it doesn't have to be like the world is ending, but for yourself, that pressure in those moments, finding your breath is amazing. Now, if the world is working out really well for you, you're not as motivated to stop the automatic modeling. We just don't seem to care about it as much. But if we don't learn how to do this, we don't have it at the ready at the same skill level when the crisis comes up, number one, which I know we've already spoken into a bit. But you're also missing out on there's extra joy to have if you get this down. But more than that, there's extra wisdom. Like what Sarah was just talking about, of that conscious attention of like, how am I doing? What is my relationship to screens right now? Are my notifications crazy? Is it okay to sit down and watch the news now, or should I go for a walk, right? This is quite literally an application of wisdom that is based not on Rob and Sarah's belief system, but on this, which I don't want you to believe me. I want you to go see this experientially for yourself.
Yes.
This is at the heart of everything you're doing all the time. Your attention and your meaning making around that, and whether you're in experience or in thought and modeling, that is the game. And the beginning of that is so powerful, because you won't use it all the time, every time. It doesn't have to change your life very much at all, but you'll have a little bit more access to it when things go bad, right? All of a sudden it's like, oh, wait, let me just 3 breaths. Oh my gosh, that really helps, whatever. And then when you have a few more experiences of it and you start seeing, oh, I can actually make good experiences louder with this. Like when I'm actually in joy, rather than to continue to model about it or begin planning, I can just stay in joy a little bit longer. Whoa, that's a big thing. And all of a sudden you really go, boop, you know, you wake up and you go, oh, this is what's happening all the time. And now you have a whole different level of wisdom online all the time. So again, the fundamental shift, it is one thing, but there's belts to it. It's like you can experience it, kind of not know the significance, start seeing it in all these different contexts, really start to get it. It comes with a wisdom practice that goes along with it, right? And then again, to take it even further, we get into identity shifting, which is really managing self within that base skill.
Right.
And you know, now you're getting up into major advanced belts of running your mind and your life and all the other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if this is quite on point, but it made me think about how that idea that people really want to like change the world and like do these big movements and they can't clean their room.
Yes.
Like it's like, you know, if you cannot move or keep your own attention, that's the room cleaning. You know,
I love that
like
so much.
it's
yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna say, we all want like these big things, but then if we're like, if you think about, well, all right, well, can you even pay attention to it long enough to see it through? And most of us can't. It's like, oh, and it's that also that thing of what I was thinking of what you just said. You know, it's not that we necessarily care about whether the room is clean or not. We're not like all people with clean rooms can change the world. It's that relationship to committing to something. You know, can you like take care of yourself? Can you put your own air mask on before you help someone else? It's not that it's again, it's that application of something versus the belief structure, the skill. You have to do this. Like that's a really important thing that I want, you know, our listeners to really get, and anyone that works with you and has any kind of relationship to this business, because there are things that are out there that are you have to believe this, you have to act like this, you have to, and that's never, that's never what we want to be expressing. It's like more of an application.
Yeah, well, so I think you said it really well. It's really important. Like, you are not going to manage anything else very well if you can't manage yourself. Like, how could you be expected to do anything significant out in the world, whether that be parenting or run a company or be a good employee or whatever, if you can't manage yourself? And if we go, what is yourself? And this training is going to be really clear on what self is and is not, et cetera. But if you can't manage yourself, you're a disaster. And we know that. And so there's a ton of forms of that. Like, if you can't manage yourself, that looks like, I can't resist every impulse for the ice cream. So I just sit around, I can't leave the ice cream or stop doing the heroin or whatever that, it's addiction. It's laziness, it's procrastination, it's following any impulse. And so, somebody says something that makes you mad, you don't have any impulse control, you just get into a fight. Well, that person ends up in jail, right? Like, this is somebody who literally can't manage themselves. And so many young, immature people, whether that be in age or just maturity, are like screaming at the world at all these high levels of complexity. And to your point, they can't even manage themselves. And so clean your room, I think we're stealing that from Jordan Peterson. It's a pointer toward a simple thing right in front of you that you're either moving right past with grand desires to go change or want other things, and you're not even managing yourself. We're not talking about your literal room. I mean, that's a great example.
Sure.
But we're talking down at the attentional level of like your own mind, right? Like, if you can't manage that, you're not going to manage anything else. And so we talk about that in this form of like self-mastery. And to oversimplify self-mastery down to one of its most valuable nuggets is, can you manage that impulse? And so another, I hate to keep ranting on this, but like, most people are not managing themselves, and they're not fully unconscious, but they're also not very conscious, right? They are just following the push.
Well, that's when people start to suffer, huh? When they realize that they're like, I know there's a problem, but I don't know how to fix it.
I don't know what to do about it. But most people are just following impulses. It's like, oh, I'm hungry. And we would say, oh, this problem at work is so big and there's nothing else I can do about it. But then lunchtime comes and they get up and they go to lunch. Like, it's like, if it was really the big problem you thought it was, you wouldn't, right? Because all of a sudden lunch and food is like a deeper problem of like self-sustenance. And so it's like, oh, well, yeah, the thing that I couldn't ignore at all for the last 5 hours, I'm just going to ignore it to go eat for a little bit. And I get that people are anxious through eating and whatever, but you know what I mean? There's like this switch of, and we're not managing any of it well at all. And so self-mastery at the core of that is, can you resist the impulse of a marketing message or this really attractive drink or this, sensual encounter or whatever? And it doesn't mean to be a monk and not do any of those things, but do you know what you're doing? And can you then set a goal that matters and actually show up for it over time? And I love the way you said that. You were like, most people wouldn't even be able to have the attention to appreciate it, even if they got like the cool car or whatever, so quickly just becomes your old car. It's like, and you're spending on it for the next 5 years, but it's only new for 6 months. And like, what happened to that other 4.5 years? It could have been a Camry the whole time. Like, it didn't matter. So we're just in wrong directions. We don't manage ourselves very well. And this is foundational to that. Right?
Well, I like thinking about how like resisting impulses also could equate to like, can you keep your attention on where it's supposed to be in the moment? Which is, of course, that's the other half of the coin, but I never really think about it that way. Resisting something isn't the same to me. I think of, pushing away versus like, can you hold your ground is kind of standing firm. And so I like that new perspective.
Yeah, it's great. I mean, it's literally the example I talk about all the time is that guy on the Rage Against the Machine. He was on the Time magazine 100 best photos of the 20th century or something. And it's this guy who's lit himself on fire in a meditative pose. And there he sits. That guy is resisting the impulse of, oh my God, I'm on fire, right? Like and he's sitting in meditation. And so that's an incredibly unhealthy, extreme example of somebody who has detached impulse from reaction. In the middle, to your point, is I've got to do the TPC report, whatever. I got to do my taxes, even though it's not fun for me. But I have the self-agency, the self-mastery to put my attention there. And kid comes up to bother, I can handle that, but come right back. Desire to go check Facebook comes up and I don't follow it, right? So it's not just resisting some loud impulse that has my attention. it's as impulses are coming in from the side, we can actually stay attached
Stay focused.
to a model and a task and
Right.
whatever. And we can easily leave. We can know what we're doing enough to leave and be in presence. So when child comes up, here's presence with child for 30 seconds and be like, hey, I'm going to hold this boundary, but I love you. And then right back, because we now have self-mastery over our attention, our meaning making, etc. So yeah, that's
I mean,
powerful.
and I was just thinking a more like straightforward example of, if you're an alcoholic, it's not about the resisting the desire to have another drink. It's about focusing or putting your attention on the things that happen when you don't, right?
Mhm.
And how is that such a different way to approach it?
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, maybe you need both, but like
it is both.
It is
I mean,
both.
it's always going
Right.
to be both, but like that's the awareness of where's my attention, what's captured me. So if your whole focus is on the drink, being able to move your focus away from it, super important. If it's over here and you have a hint of a drink, not going to it is super important. So can I stay here, right? So do you have the power to drop a thought? Do you also have the power to stay with a focus? But that all requires this awareness that we're talking about, this ability to move this awareness around. And
See, an hour on attention, and I bet you're blown away, listeners, because
Bam.
I sure enjoyed the deep dive.
I sure hope so. It is not just about knowing it. It is about applying it. Once you begin to apply this in your life, we're not trying to be interesting or even give you new information as much as we're trying to get you to actually change how you run your own consciousness.
And help you. Yeah. And
So
give you whatever,
go play with
help you're
this.
looking.
See if you can move your attention, your breath, and count to 10 and stay there. If you can't, you probably need help with this. And we're here to help. So yeah.
RobScott.com, The Rob Scott Show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, wherever you get your podcasts. And
share this, share it. There's people who need to hear this stuff. So if you got any value out of any of this, just be like, hey, mom, dad, friend, coworker, whatever, this was cool. And I think you might need this because you're going through something that's tough, or just because they like learning weird stuff. So we're going to try and keep it weird over here. Awesome. Okay, cool. Why don't we say goodbye? I think that's amazing. Thank you, everybody. Be kind to yourself and everybody else. Have an amazing rest of your day.